Pennsylvania has 20 officially designated state symbols. Now, you probably know the state animal is the white-tailed deer, and the state fish is the brook trout. What about the state dog or the insect? Did you know Pennsylvania has its own state song? Hey, we bring that all to you right now when we go out in the open. Welcome to this edition of Out in the Open. I'm Alex JoAnne
And I'm JoAnne Zidock. And if we got a show for you, I mean, I tell you about learning things. You're going to love all the wonderful things you're going to be learning this time.
You know, you say that every week and you make this big build-up, but this is something a little bit different. You know, we're known as an outdoor show, basically. And if you think about the state symbols, JoAnne, you know that about half of them are outdoor-oriented, you know.
Right.
Animals, fish, flowers, birds, those kinds of things. So, you know, there are a few other ones, like the state seal and the flag and those other things that, you know, are part of the 20, but the animals and other things are very interesting, and the show we're going to do is very interesting about how these all came about and when they came about.
I think that's going to be, you're going to love it. I've loved it so far.
Well, it's been fun to do, you know,
yes.
Finding these state symbols and then finding something to go along with it. So stay tuned, we'll be right back. Back in 1778, Caleb Lowndes of Philadelphia is given credit for the original design of Pennsylvania's coat of arms. This is not the state seal, but it does appear on many documents and publications. It does appear on the state flag. It was the coat of arms for the William Penn family, and it first officially appeared in an official capacity on paper money issued in 1777. The seal of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania verifies the authenticity of proclamations, commissions, and other legal and official state papers, almost identical to the coat of arms but minus the horses. It is most frequently used as a raised imprint. However, on the reverse side is a picture of liberty dominating over tyranny and warning, both can't survive. The General Assembly in 1799 authorized the official Pennsylvania state flag, fringed in gold with a coat of arms on a blue field. In recent years, there's been a move to redesign the state flag, citing there are 20 other state flags with a crest in the middle on a field of blue. So far, the General Assembly has not moved to simplify the design. In 1931, the state designated the ruffed grouse as the state bird. And our friend Tim Flanagan, who has written that great book, Grouse and Woodcock, Birds of My Life, tells us a little bit how it all came about.
The ruffed grouse is known as Bonassa umbellus. It obtained its scientific name from a bird that was sent in 1750 from Philadelphia to England, and it was examined over there, and it gained its scientific name as Bonassa umbellus by 1840. Even further back, 25,000 years ago, the ruffed grouse existed and lived in central Pennsylvania. We know that because in 1903, grouse bones were discovered in the Frankstown Cave near Altoona, and those bones date back to the Pleistocene era. In 1931, it became our state bird specific to North America, and it continues to be the king of game birds worldwide.
And grouse benefit from the eastern hemlock, the state tree. Hemlocks are conifers and home to roosting grouse. The hemlock's flat needles block wind efficiently, and the grouse take advantage of the tree's comfort zone for winter survival, and as cover from avian predators. The eastern hemlock was essential to the state's first settlers, who used the sturdy hemlock to build log cabins for protection from elements and enemies. The eastern hemlock was designated a state tree June 22, 1931. Same as the hemlock tree, the state flower, the mountain laurel, provides benefit to the ruffed grouse. During years of poor mass production, grouse survived the winter on a diet of mountain laurel. As warm weather and about mid-June, Pennsylvania mountainsides come alive with the laurel's blazing pink flowers. But if it was up to former Milford resident and the Pennsylvania governor, Gifford Pinchot, The azalea would be the state flower. However, as the story goes, Pinchot's wife and the Pennsylvania House and Senate preferred the mountain laurel, and on May 5, 1933, the mountain laurel was designated the state flower. Not enough can be said about Pennsylvania's state animal, the white-tailed deer. Native Americans used every part of the deer in their everyday lives. First, of course, was for food, and then hides for clothing, antlers and bones for tools, weapons, splintered bone for needles, fish hooks, sinew for string and rope, and even the top part of the skull was made into spoons. Early settlers could not survive without deer meat and hides. The Pennsylvania House of Representatives passed the nation's first game laws in 1721 to protect these valuable animals. And because of the Pennsylvania Game Commission and millions of hunters, the white-tailed deer population thrives in the Keystone State, designated on October 2nd, 1959.
Hello, my name is Tim Flanagan. I'm a retired wildlife conservation officer. I've been retired for 16 years, but through my 30 years as a wildlife conservation officer, I studied wildlife, and of course we enforced the laws protecting wildlife, and one of our main concerns was white-tailed deer. In the process, I developed an insatiable appetite for information about white-tailed deer. And there's no surprise to white-tailed deer reproduction dynamics. We all know that. It's chiseled in stone science. Dr. Alt knew that as well. But one of the dynamics of deer reproduction is something we rarely ever, actually I should say never hear about. I call it trigger finger deer management. There's a dynamic with white-tailed deer reproduction in that adult does will have 2 fawns at their second birth. But the fawn born this year will be bred at 6 months of age, and she will give birth to a single fawn on her birthday in the springtime. So on her first birthday, she gives birth to a single fawn. It is a pretty much 95% sure bet that that single fawn will be a buck fawn. That criteria, that standard holds true in the wild and in captivity. For many years, I photographed in deer farms, for cervid farms. They were raising and selling deer. And the dynamics exist there the same as they do in the wild. You can't change deer reproductive dynamics. So what we learn, or how we should apply this, is with our trigger when we go hunting and use an antlerless deer license. An antlerless deer license is a license for X amount of pounds of meat. We're not shooting for trophy antlers, but we're shooting to put as much meat on the table as we can with that single bullet or that tag. So I want to shoot the biggest, oldest doe I can to put as much meat on the table. Here's how this dynamic works. The older a deer gets, the longer her nose gets, and we can easily identify her. She's bigger, more robust, long nose. She's going to have twin fawns every year, sometimes 3, sometimes triplets. Those fawns can be twin does. They can be twin bucks, rarely. Often it's 1 doe and one buck fawn. But it's very common 2 does. So all of a sudden you have this big doe producing 2 fawns, and your deer herd is jumping exponentially as they drop these twin fawns out. If you, the hunter, with an antlerless license, shoots the big old doe to put as much meat on the table as you can and leave those 2 fawns alone, let's say she has a buck fawn and a doe fawn. You leave those 2 fawns alone, they're going to help increase your deer herd and raise the buck to doe ratio. Here's how that works. You shoot the big old doe, she's not going to be producing 2 fawns next year. That young fawn, let's say there's a buck fawn and a doe fawn. If you shoot that doe fawn, she's not going to produce that buck fawn next year, so you let her live. If you shoot that button buck fawn, he's not going to present antlers or grow antlers and become a trophy animal. So if you shoot only the adult doe, you keep your deer herd young by not shooting the single doe fawn. That doe fawn in the spring is going to produce a buck for you. And if you can manage your deer herd this way with trigger finger deer management on your piece of ground that you control, you can't do it statewide, but if you own a piece of ground and you apply this type of management by always taking the big adult doe out of the herd, you will automatically increase your buck to doe ratio. You'll have fewer deer eating the habitat, and actually you'll have better habitat and a better buck to deer ratio. It's as simple as shooting the largest female deer you can see. Now, when you look at these 2 fawns, if Please don't shoot either of those fawns. But as you look at them, you'll notice the doe's head, the doe fawn, his head is rounded. The buck fawn head looks flat. He's got two antler pedicels under there. Even though they don't show, it makes his head look flat, like he's had a crew cut right across the top. Her head looks rounded. The doe fawn will always be bigger than the buck fawn because it's nature's way. The doe fawn is bigger and she has a greater chance of survival. So it's very simple population dynamics, reproduction dynamics of white-tailed deer. The first birth fawn is almost always a buck fawn. So take the big doe out of the population, you raise your buck to doe ratio, and your quality of your habitat, and your quality of the habitat will increase.
It took until 1965 for the state to designate the Great Dane as the state dog. And I didn't know that William Penn had a Great Dane, but found that out too.
How about that? That's another good one, I told you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great Danes were used for hunting and for a lot of things on the early frontier. Great dog. Here's an interesting story about what went down in Harrisburg when someone suggested the Great Dane as the state dog. But first of all, if you visit the governor's reception room in the state capitol, you'll see a portrait of William Penn with his Great Dane. So back to the story. It seems on August 15, 1965, when the Speaker of the House called for a vote to designate the Great Dane, the House was filled with yips and growls and barks from the Assembly. He banged on his gavel and confirmed, "The ARFs have it," and the barking dog vote became part of Pennsylvania history. Here's another reason the eastern hemlock is the state tree. The Pennsylvania state fish is the brook trout. The brook trout, the only native trout to Pennsylvania, needs cold, clear water to survive, and the hemlocks prefer to grow in damp soils along the waterways, providing cooling shade during the hot summer months for brook trout to survive. But the state's Fish and Boat Commission also annually stocks hatchery-raised brook trout, along with brown trout, rainbow trout, and golden trout in many of the state's other impoundments. The brook trout was designated the state fish March 9, 1970. We know them as lightning bugs that flicker on our hot summer nights. There was some confusion between fireflies and the black fly that plagued the Commonwealth in 1988. So while the firefly was designated April 10, 1974, it wasn't until late in 1988 the firefly was singled out by its Latin name, Potarus pennsylvanica de Geer. Whoa, hope I got that right. In 1982, the state designated milk as our state beverage, and no doubt, we have a lot of dairy farms. I mean, they're going down, but we are. And the thing that I found was very interesting was that we produce more Swiss cheese in Pennsylvania than any other state, except for Wisconsin, the cheeseheads.
Wow.
Although numbers continue to decrease, we still have a lot of dairy cows in Pennsylvania. The Keystone State supports about 485,000 head of cattle on a little over 6,000 farms. Except for Wisconsin, we produce more butter and Swiss cheese than any other state in the Union. Each dairy cow produces about 22 quarts of milk a day. Designated April 29, 1982. Ever wonder what that plant is that you see growing along the turnpike and other state roads? Crown vetch. The folks at Penn State University developed this hardy ground cover to reduce erosion and stabilize soil. It also is used to feed livestock. Designated June 17, 1982. Every one of these 425 coal-burning locomotives was built in Pennsylvania. These powerful steam engines pulled passenger cars across the state. The K4S steam locomotives, the state's steam locomotive, can be seen in railroad museums in Altoona and Strasburg. Designated December 18, 1987. On that same day in December, the GC14849 Electric was designated the state electric locomotive. This engine could pull passenger cars and coal cars at a speed of just above 100 miles an hour. You can see one displayed in Harrisburg. Designated December 18, 1987. In 1988, the U.S. brig Niagara was named the state ship. And that's kind of interesting because she's still afloat. She's still floating. She's up in Erie. and she goes out in the summer, and she actually takes people who want to learn how to sail an old ship like that out. So
Isn't that amazing?
this is interesting. She's tied up behind the Erie Maritime Museum in downtown Erie, and if you want, you can actually apply to sail on her as a student. The Brig Niagara is an outdoor exhibit for the museum, but during the summer she actually sails the Great Lakes. Best to call ahead to get information about visiting or applying for the sail training program. Designated May 26, 1988. Also in 1988, the state named the state fossil. It's a trilobite, has a long other kind of a name, but it's interesting. It's been around for 260-something million years, maybe. So for about 250 million years, just lying around Pennsylvania, until a science class of elementary students brought this tiny invertebrate, just measuring from 1 to 4 inches, to the attention of the House of Representatives, who in turn designated it as the state fossil December 5th, 1988. Most people never heard its song and don't even know that Pennsylvania has a state song, written and composed by Eddie Curry and Ronnie Bonner, designated November 29th, 1990. It goes something like this. Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, mighty is your name, steeped in glory and tradition, object of acclaim, where brave men fought, and foe of freedom. Tyranny decried, till the bell of independence filled the countryside. Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, may your future be filled with honor everlasting as your history. Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, blessed by God's own hand, birthplace of a mighty nation, keystone of the land, where first our country's flag unfolded, freedom to proclaim, may the voices of tomorrow glorify your name. In 2014, finally, the state got around to naming the Pennsylvania long rifle as the firearm of the state firearm, and it's well due, well due. And our friend Dave Ehrig tells us a little bit about how that came about. Act 73 of June 26, 2014, designated the Pennsylvania long rifle as official firearm of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Here's Dave Ehrig with the details about how it all happened.
This is a William Henry family from Lancaster, pre-Revolutionary War. Now, not this gun, obviously, because it's percussion, but 5 generations of Henrys built muzzle-loading guns, all one at a time, custom guns. And they're just an amazing family, amazing history. Jacobsburg Historical Society was recognized by the state of Pennsylvania with a resolution for our efforts in preserving the history of muzzle-loading guns and the Henry family. Well, that was in 2012. 2 years later, we did something miraculous. We actually got a gun declared a state gun. Just like the white-tailed deer is our state mammal, and the ruffed grouse is our state bird, and the hemlock tree is our state tree. Well, the flintlock rifle is now the state gun of Pennsylvania, and for good reason. It was made here first. It was made more in Pennsylvania than any other place. They were exported to the Kentucky territories. They opened up the West. In fact, even the fur trappers in the Rocky Mountains were using Pennsylvania rifles because you never ran out of caps. As long as you had a stone, the gun would spark and you would be able to harvest elk or buffalo or anybody who was trying to steal your furs from you. So this has been a sport of love, a sport of fun. When you fire black powder, it doesn't just go bang, it goes kabang. And then this big white cloud of smoke comes out and everybody inhales deeply, the nectar of sulfur on the air. It's just a fun gun to shoot.
They were built in Lock Haven, Clinton County for 10 years from 1937. The small Piper Cub was easily recognizable with its famous yellow fuselage and black trim. Act 73 of June 26, 2014, designated the Piper J3 Cub as the official state aircraft of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The last state designation came on April 23, 2019, when after 2 years of trying, by high school students in the Chesapeake Bay Foundation Student Leadership Council, brought the information to then Governor Wolf, who finally signed a bill designating the eastern hellbender as the official state amphibian of Pennsylvania. Not cute to some, the hellbender is sometimes called the mud dog, or the devil dog, or the ground puppy. It's the largest aquatic salamander in the United States and grows to 30 inches in length. Found only in 15 states, hellbenders are a good indication of water quality because they can only live in clean, cool, fast-moving rivers and streams. Highly susceptible to pollutants, only about 60% of the eastern hellbender's historic population remains today.
Just about the time we were putting the show together, State Senator Mahaffey out in Dauphin County decided that maybe the Hershey Kiss ought to be the state candy. You know, they produce 70 million candies, Hershey Kisses, a day. 70 million a day. And Hershey's been around for 215 years, so sounds like a good deal.
I'll have some if you don't mind.
A kiss?
A Hershey.
Oh, you want a lot of kisses?
Chocolate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the show. We enjoyed bringing it to you. Now, as we said earlier, we're basically an outdoor show, but half of it was outdoors, you have to admit, and the other half was kind of very interesting.
That's right. I think it was very interesting. But I think all of these things about, they're all our state.
Yeah, and you can, get out and see some of them, and it's kind of good, party chatter, asking people if they know what certain state symbols are. State flower,
Right.
the mountain laurel.
Yes.
Almost didn't be the state flower, but for,
Hey,
a wife
it's
in
ours.
the right place in the Senate, and so they did it. Hey, we hope you enjoyed the show. We enjoyed bringing it to you. Until next time, we're going to be somewhere.
We're going to be out in the open.
Absolutely.